just as a reminder, um, although imported ceramics to Southern Africa and the Cape is part of our history, African ceramics are, of course, diverse in style, and we have a long, long history spanning thousands of years of beautiful, innovative ceramic objects that have been made in Africa. And I've chosen the Knox sculpture, which is so iconic. And of course, many members would know the Lydenburg heads, the 7 Lydenburg heads, of which one is illustrated here, from Lydenburg in the present-day Mpumalanga province. And I've also chosen a domestic vessel, beautifully decorated with arrows and zigzag patterns, also from the Mpumalanga area, but from 1946. So this is just to tell us, to remind us that we have this very, very rich history in Africa. Asian trade ceramics, of course, arrived before colonial times, and I've selected a few shards from the Izika collection. They were collected in the Zimbabwe area. They were not scientifically excavated, but we have them in our collection. They arrived in the collection in the late 19th century. There is the Celadon, Chinese Celadon fragment, Persian ceramic fragments, and underglaze blue porcelain fragments from the Yuan to the Ming dynasties. So, of course, Africa was very much connected to the Indian Ocean world, and archaeological excavations at ancient trading sites such as Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe has proven that we've had those connections going back many, many years.
When we talk about ancient trade routes like the Silk Road, we forget that the Silk Road was extended so far and wide as to touch the southern tips of Africa. And like those great civilizations that are in Africa, pre colonial civilizations, we find things in China that were made in Africa, such as golden ornaments and coins with Africans on them. Also, in China, there are depictions of dark skinned people, and a lot of these people are thought to have moved or have been moved in through the Middle Eastern trade routes that linked Africa to East Asia. Now, some people believe that Africans founded the dynasties of China. This is not what this is about. I'm not going to claim something like that. To me, that's kind of outrageous, especially given the fact that some of the civilizations in Africa do not predate these Chinese civilizations. But it's obvious that the Chinese were very familiar with the direction of the Africans because there are maps drawn up by Chinese people which depict the African continent. And not only that, they depict African people, as you see in these figurines, pretty accurately. And they know which direction they come from. They even have names for these people. And these are different than the native black people which are around Asia. These people are specifically known because of their direction and where they fit on the map and where they came from. This map depicts 3 areas. One is Japan, parts of Japan. The other is Asia, wholly Asia. The other is Africa, and it shows parts of Eurasia. Interestingly, Europe is completely left out. Now, Kunyun or Kunlun was the name that they gave to African slaves or Africans, but then they started associating it with African slaves. And there's even a book that is about a slave that becomes an immortal that was written in ancient China and was revised in the 1500s and became how he became an immortal.
当我们想到古代中国时，许多人认为它是一个文化上与世隔绝的地方。在我们印象中，古代中国人以他们的技术、艺术、文学为傲，不关心外部世界。当然，丝绸之路促进了一定程度的文化交流，虽然这个时期的对话者多来自中亚、日本、韩国和东南亚，但是中国与黑人的接触呢？古代中国人对黑人的了解是可信的吗？根据历史资料，好像他们确实是了解的。今天我们将讨论古代中国人眼中的黑人，以及非洲人在中国领土上的第一个有纪律的证据。
中国文献中最早涉及黑人的是公元前5世纪莫迪的著作。莫迪在他的哲学论集《墨子》中区分了一些人和其他人，一些人指的就是黑人。稍后的著作《山海经》里，黑人被描述为有着虎头鸟足的生物，然而这说的都不是非洲人，黑不过是指华夏帝国周边的蛮夷之族。直到很晚，我们才开始看到一些参考文献中的黑人指的是非洲人。昆仑人作为一个新的人种分类，逐渐地被用于描述有着黑色皮肤的外国人。这个词开始被广泛使用，是在公元7世纪，广州都督陆元瑞被一个据说是马来西亚后裔的外国商人所杀之后。唐宋年间，昆仑的疆域被认为不仅包括东南亚，甚至远至非洲东海岸。昆仑代表了一大批不同种族的外国人。从12世纪的作家朱玉的作品中，我们可以看到昆仑人之间的区别。在他的《平洲可谈》一书里，记载了一种昆仑人，比任何其他的人种都要强壮。在他的笔下，这种昆仑人有红色的嘴唇、白色的牙齿和墨黑的皮肤，而且他们是被阿拉伯商人带来的，一般被卖给广州地区富贵家庭做佣人。学者们认为这些昆仑人就是非洲人，但是我们怎么知道这是真的？1930年，中国学者张新良写了一本书，追溯到唐朝，证明了昆仑一词曾被用作一个广义的术语，但是对于特定的人群，更专业的术语是层期。这两个词是阿拉伯语中 zinj 在中文里的音译，本意为黑。这是昆仑人被阿拉伯商人作为货物带到中国最清楚的证据。
As easy as it should be to spot the difference between an African and a Chinese person, there's still a hangover of who or when Black Africans landed in China. The earliest we do know is that it must have been East Africans who actually have wrote about those areas, including places like ancient Egypt, which were aware of places very, very far away. Somewhere in 200 BC and going forward, the emperors and adventurers of China thought of going to a place which they called Dachin, which means second China. This place is thought to have been Greece or Rome. When they traveled that direction, they found it impossible to get there, especially since there were so many merchants who had ulterior motives from the Middle East. The Middle East has always been familiar with Egypt, China, India, and Rome. Everybody else was in the outskirts, and so they were only partially aware of each other. One day, the Chinese finally made it to Dachin, and they depict all kinds of narratives about the Romans and the Greeks. They too observed ancient Egyptians, or Egyptians at that time, and noticed that there were people of extremely dark color. Later on, as the story goes on, we have people like Alexander and the Islamic merchants who became way more familiar, or familiarized the Chinese way more with darker skinned people. Now, these darker skinned people were different than other darker skinned people which they're familiar with, which were the Indians. Even the Indians were shocked by the appearance of the Africans, though there are other people around India that have that appearance. But to know that it was so abundant in other places was a shock. In the court of Kublai Khan, after Genghis Khan and his dynasty that lasted a very short time, but expanded far and wide, Kublai Khan found himself somewhere close to Europe. And in his court, we have depictions of Europeans, mainly from Rome, and we also have depictions of Africans, black Africans. Luckily, these places did not fall under the reign of Kublai Khan. In fact, Kublai Khan's dynasty, his entire lineage crawled all the way back to China. Finding out that the world was so big was one of the biggest things ever. In the 1200s, the Khans did damage. But in the 1300s, the information that the Khans had kept was a curiosity to the Chinese. And so they wondered, how big is the world really? And so Zheng He traveled all the way to East Africa to find out.
郑和前3次的航行到了越南、爪哇和斯里兰卡以及印度，只有1413年的第4次航行中，他才间接地抵达了非洲。那是在伊朗的霍尔木兹海峡，郑和见到了来自索马里首都摩加迪沙的商人。然而，对于郑和和他的同行者，这次见面最神奇的地方在于，他们有机会看到长颈鹿，一种他们从没见过的生物。1414年，郑和的船队带着长颈鹿和几个非洲的自由人返回中国，以向皇帝朝贡。1417年，郑和船队的第5次远航在非洲登陆。位于非洲东海岸的这些航行，最权威的记录来自于随军翻译官费信。他虽然不是郑和船队里热情的追随者，但他提供了关于这群人航行最准确、最有启发性的记录。同样重要的是，这些记录帮助我们了解中国人怎么看待15世纪东非人的生活。
This is Siyu village, located in the northeast of Kenya. Legends among local people speaks of a story that more than 600 years ago, survivors from a sunken Chinese ship found their way here and married to the local beauties. People who live in the house you're seeing behind me was proved to have Chinese genetics.
According to legends, a team of Chinese sailors survived a shipwreck in the Indian Ocean waters and settled in Lamu Island. Historians contend that the sailors were part of a fleet sent by the legendary Chinese navigator Zheng He. 6 centuries later, the descendants of these Chinese sailors are visible in Lamu, where China's ancient maritime Silk Road terminates. In Siyu village, archaeologists have discovered artifacts like porcelain and coins that were symbols of the Ming dynasty.
This is some pieces of Chinese porcelain here. When I walk around, you will meet these things. There are many steel pieces. When you walk around, you'll see the small pieces. So this is, I found it here in Siyu.
Mwamaka and her family are among the ones who are a living testimony of the earliest contacts between Kenya and China. It was in 2002 that a team of distinguished Kenyan and Chinese researchers carried a DNA analysis on Mwamaka's 63-year-old mother and discovered that she has Chinese genetics.
They came and we welcomed them first day, and they took some hair of us for testing to ensure that we are one of them.
Soon afterwards, the Chinese government offered Mwamaka a scholarship to study Chinese traditional medicine in China. Kenyan and Chinese archaeologists have been tracing evidence of ancient contacts in the Kenyan coast. They hope to find the shipwreck to help unearth all artifacts symbolizing ancient cultural and trade ties.